I've been getting a lot of links to foundries in India.
Oh,
I'm going
gee.
to try to talk to my guys pouring barefoot or with a pair of sandals on and no safety glasses.
Yep, no gloves.
Oh, they're kneeled down right beside the mold. They're pouring it towards them. They're pouring. It's crazy stuff that you see.
You're listening to the Foundry Talk podcast with your hosts, Nate McLean and Perry Merritt. Take it away, boys.
All right. We are here today, episode 3 of Foundry Talk. With me, I have my partner, Nate McLean, and our guest today is Tony Workman from Art Castings of Colorado. Tony and I met a few years ago. I actually filled out a form on their website. I can't even remember what I was asking for. I think I was asking for something about investment plaster or something. And I got invited up to come in for a tour. Tony was gracious enough to haul me around the foundry, and I was just in awe of the entire process. I couldn't believe the kinds of things that they were doing up there. So I'm excited to have Tony with us this morning. Tony's a longtime veteran of the foundry world. So, Tony, without wasting any more time, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started and where you are today with art castings?
Well, right out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went to Fort Lauderdale and was a golf pro at a course where they filmed Caddyshack for 2 years. My uncle and a group of his partners were doing SBA loans and lent a foundry some money, and it was green sand, no bake. Our biggest clients were from the pump industries, pouring impellers. Our claim to fame was that we poured 36 different alloys off of the same pattern. So pump manufacturers could pick and choose what alloy they needed for their application. One thing I found out is we were pretty average at doing that. Also, I thought they were hiring me because I was really smart, but found out that the only reason they're hiring me is because no one else would want to do it. The foundry was very dirty, not very well organized, a very, very old foundry. The owner was an 85-year-old gentleman named John Horner. Love that guy. He taught me so much. And my uncle and his guys told me if I could turn it around, show that it would make money, that they would give me some additional capital to clean the place up and make it a going concern. What I found out was they just wanted their note paid off. And so we were always cash strapped and floating checks, and it wasn't much fun. So after a couple years, I was sitting in my office one day and I got a call from a headhunter that said, would you be interested in running an art foundry? And I said, sure, what's an art foundry? And so I came up here and went through several interviews. The foundry at that time was owned by a gentleman named Richard Gooding, who was a Denver businessman, very well-to-do, great guy. And the art foundry is getting ready to go out of business, so he bought the note and he owned Pepsi-Cola Bottling of Colorado, tried to get a couple of his managers from Pepsi to come up and run it. And the corporate world and the artist world do not mix very well. So he hired me to come up and run it. And this September, I'll be here 38 years. My plan was to come in, turned around, go find something else to do. Richard was a one-of-a-kind gentleman, and he and I just stuck together. And over the years, I've bought into the foundry and Now I own most of the foundry. I'm still involved. Richard's passed away. I'm still involved with his two sons who are great guys. And, but they don't have the time to know anything about the foundry. So I kind of just run it on my own. And first thing I did when I got up here is I knew there needed to be a lot of changes, and there were some people up here that had worked here a long time that didn't think we needed to change. So we changed the culture and we changed some of the people. And right now we have 35 employees. I would say 15 to 20 of them have over 20 years experience here. We have
Wow.
very, very little turnover, and we've got a good reputation and great employees and a great client base.
So a lot of questions in that thing. Great intro. Thank you. First one off the bat is, how are you retaining these guys? They just love you, or do they love the work, or is it I mean, that's great, that kind of retention.
If any of them watch this, they'll know I'm kidding, but I tell everybody it's because they're unemployable anywhere else.
Well, it's good that they know that you're kidding because, yeah, that talent is not to be overlooked by any means. Having a good strong team is key to being successful. So yeah, you sound like you're blessed in that manner.
As
Wow.
anybody knows, no one's getting rich in this business, from the owners all the way down to the people working here. But what we do is we have a very good benefits program. We do profit sharing, 401k, health insurance, which is none of our competitors do, which makes it tough to compete, but we seem to do that. And it's a very, very stable place to work. You know, they know I'm not going to be out there yelling and screaming. And, you know, I basically am to the point where I tell them what I want done and leave it up to them to get it done. And we have enough experience and enough great people that I don't worry about it being done correctly.
Yeah. Well, it's
And
good to
you,
have that expertise.
yeah, I read also on your website when you talked about you taking over the place that you have grown like from 2,500 square feet to 25,000 square feet. Is that accurate?
Um, I think we probably had a little more than 2,500 square feet, but right now I'd guesstimate we have around 20,000 square feet in house. In 94, we built a 10,000 square foot addition that all of our metal, our welding, sandblasting, metal chasing, and patinas in, plus our office. When I first started, the offices were in a double wide, which I was very comfortable with. You know, there's some really nice double wides out there these days, and but we basically had to grow to keep up with capacity. And we, for several years, probably 10 or 15, we were also sharp certified, meaning we were exempt from routine OSHA inspections. We jumped through all the safety hoops, spent a lot of money on air handling equipment. With our last administration, they basically decided if you had one work comp claim during the year, you could no longer be sharp certified. So we lost that. And basically, with the rules right now, there's no use trying to get it back because it's almost impossible to keep unless you just set everybody around in a circle and let them hold hands all day long. In full PPE gear, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I was also impressed with, well, with the facility, but was the way it's laid out and the way that you guys move through the process. And your website, by the way, if you're interested in going to the website, artcastings.com, terrific website, has a great story about how they actually do the work and show the kind of works that they're doing. worth checking out if you haven't looked at it, artcastings.com. But Tony, talk about kind of from the very beginning, what happens when something comes in and how does it get through your process and then out the door again?
Well, we don't market the art, we market the artist. The artist comes up with a plan or a sale, or that they're going to sell a piece, or they're going to put it in a gallery, or they have a commission. So they'll bring the piece to us, and the first thing that's done is a mold is made, and it's usually a urethane mold with a plaster of Paris mother mold. Then we'll pour wax into this mold to get a replica of the artist's original. All of our castings, we try to keep the wall thicknesses at 3/16 of an inch. Um, so the waxes, after they're poured, they'll have seam lines, little defects. Our next department cleans those up so they look as close to the artist's original as possible. Next department is spruing, where we add, for sand guys, gates and risers, we call them sprues, how the metal's going to be fed into the wax. We have pouring cups. Then it goes into the shell room. We have 2 different ceramic slurries and 3 different stuccos. Depending on the size of the piece, it'll get anywhere from 8 to 15 coats. Each coat has to completely dry. We start off with a slurry that's conducive to pulling out detail and a real fine stucco, and then it moves up to build the strength of the shell. When we get that all done, we dip the piece in the slurry only. It's called our seal coat. Then it's ready to go to the pouring floor. We have a Pacific kiln that will de-wax the pieces. The pieces go into the kiln. There's discs in the bed of the kiln. All the wax melts out. That's where they get the lost wax process. Then we'll pull those out, let them cool down to room temperature. We water test them to make sure there's no leaks or anything. Then the shells are preheated again to 1600 degrees. And at the same time, we're melting metal in a 230-pound induction furnace. We melt the metal when the shell temperature is correct, metal temperature is correct. We'll pull those shells out hot and place them in a sand bed. We pour from the furnace into a transfer ladle, then pour the metal into the shells. When those cool down, we go into a room that has a pneumatic shaker. We'll shake the shell off, or most of it. Then we cut our gating systems off. When we pour, we use 50% virgin ingot and 50% remelt. We run all our gating systems through a wheelabrator to clean them, so all the metal's very clean. After it comes out of the knockout room, it gets sandblasted, and because the wall thicknesses are 3/16 of an inch, a lot of times we have to cast things in pieces so we can build ceramic shell on the outside as well as the inside of the wax, so the thickness of the wax dictates the thickness of the metal. So we have 3 welders. Their job is to put the pieces back together. Once they're done, it goes to metal chasing. Our metal chasers look at the texture on both sides of the weld, knock the weld down, match the texture. Once they do that, it goes to patina, so it's sandblasted again. If the metal chasers and welders have done their job, you'll never be able to tell where it was welded. And the patina room is basically the coloring of the piece. The artist dictates what patina they want, and through chemicals, our alloy is 95% copper. So if you have copper gutters on your house, they're going to oxidize. We just heat the bronze and apply different chemicals that bring out different colors. Then we'll seal the patina, put it on a base. Whether the artist wants a base, they can pick out wood, stone, combination, whatever, and then it's ready for us to ship out.
So the
And
artist, go ahead.
and the other thing, that it's the same process for whether the piece is 12 inches tall or 14 feet tall.
Again, I've got a ton of questions. I've seen some of the things that you've done, and just so people understand, you say 14 feet. I have seen things in your office or in your facility that were at least 14 feet tall. It's crazy how big some of these castings are, but also on your website, you see little statuettes, the Toy Story stuff that you guys have up there. Those things look like they're maybe 8, 9 inches tall. So you
Yeah.
guys do it a wide range. When you're dipping, are you using robotics or are you hand dipping, or how are you guys doing that?
Everything's hand dip. If we could use robotics in there, we would, but every piece is so unique. You would spend more time programming the robots versus actually doing the dipping. And, on weekends and stuff, if we're behind, I'll go in there and dip. And it's not a terrible job. Our foundry is very, very clean. I've never been in many other foundries that are as clean as ours is. So we don't have any department in the foundry that's you wouldn't want to work in.
Oh.
Yeah. That's awesome. When you guys are shelling those with the waxes being 3/16 of an inch thick, are you using a pre-wet before you actually dip in slurry or primary or secondary slurries?
Primaries.
Okay.
Yeah,
So mainly, do you just use one slurry tank that's primary? The way you only have to maintain one type.
right. We have one primary slurry and one backup slurry. The
Okay.
primary slurry is thinner and has finer powders, refractory powders in it, and that will give you your detail. The backup slurry is just to make sure it adheres to the first coat slurries, and you're just building strength to hold the metal. The idea is if a piece has 15 coats, you want those 15 coats to be one coat. You don't want separation between them. Anybody can pour metal, but it's very, very hard to pour good metal and be very consistent at it.
Yeah. So the delamination between layers of your slurry coats, do you see that happening because of let's say that a layer isn't dry before it's dipped the second time?
Now, that if a layer isn't dry before it's dipped a second time, that causes all other kinds of defects. Usually with the lamination is you're wanting to wet the previous coat so that the binder in the slurry connects with that. Sometimes your slurry's a little too thick. Sometimes it doesn't get the attention it needs. After 37 years, we run process controls in each of our departments, and hopefully, if they're not deviated from, we get a consistent outcome.
Sure, makes sense. Yeah, maintaining the slurry tank as you build shells and you deplete that tank, I would think that there would be some challenges involved with adding back and making sure that it's the right consistency and
Well, a lot of people will send their slurry material back to one of the slurry manufacturers to get tested. We do all our testing in-house. We check viscosity twice a day. Once a week, we'll run an SiO2 test to make sure that, the amount of liquid and the amount of water in the binders, where it needs to be for the silica. So we run pretty tight controls on our slurries. And I've been in foundries where they do the touchy-feely, smelly test too. So
Yes. How long?
well,
How long does it
Yeah,
take to
and
get?
some
This
green
is
sand foundries, they'll when they're mowing their sand, they've had the old saying where they throw it against the wall and see if it sticks, and if it sticks to the wall, then hey, that must be good green sand.
Yeah. Um, you just better make sure that the guy that's doing the throwing is the same guy doing it every day. And, I've been in art foundries where they have no pyrometer for the metal. The guy, I've been doing this long enough, I can just look and tell what temperature the metal is. So I'm just
Mhm.
very happy those are our competitors.
Yes, sir. Yep, agreed. Yeah, you guys just keep doing that
Yeah.
every day.
The one thing, and every foundry out there in the country, what they do and how they do it might not work, especially in a ceramic shell foundry or a lost wax foundry, because of the humidity in the outside environment. What they do and what works for them might not work somewhere else. Um, but it seems to me that every art foundry I've ever talked to thinks they're the best at what they do. And, you know, just depends where you set the bar, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just art foundries, to be quite honest. I mean, a lot of sand foundries, they're kind of the same way. That for the fact that you'll get a job in from another facility, you may not know 100% why you got that job, but it's already rigged. And the first thing that everybody wants to do is rip all that rigging off of there, get rid of it, and put ours on there because their stuff doesn't work. It's like, well, how do you know? You can learn a lot from other people, and that's why it's always interesting to go into other foundries and talk to other foundrymen, network and communicate with people because what Tony does might be something that I can utilize in my shop to make myself better. And in the grand scheme of things, it makes the whole industry better, and it allows us to help one another along the way. So I think that networking and mentoring is crucial and key to for a successful and strong foundry industry, whether it's
We
art or
also
industrial castings.
we also run our slurries a lot thinner than the slurry manufacturers recommend because we have a lot of undercuts, like different things. We're not pouring um, shapes. We're pouring artwork that has a lot of detail.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, when we get involved with structural engineers, I first thing I tell them is we don't read the little marks between a tape measure, just say the big numbers because we don't have to hold tolerances. It just has to look like what is brought in. And the
Sure.
other thing, no one does any testing, all we care about is surface quality. No one's doing any dye penetrant or x-rays or checking tensile yield or elongation. It's just how pretty is it.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and when you've got the metal chasers and you guys are processing those, I mean, that talent and that expertise, I mean, that is a craft in and of itself. The artist is on a totally different level for sure, but those guys, I mean, the employee retention and that ability to do that is pretty impressive. They're artists in my mind. They're artists and craftsmen in a totally different degree with metal like that.
Because I wanted to know what they did early in my career, I tried it and they asked me to please never come back. So it does take yeah, all of the foundry stuff I can do. The stuff that needs an artisan or somebody with skill, they don't let me do.
I
Uh,
understand.
I'm not very good at it. Um, but yeah, and it just takes someone that has an eye and a gift, and then you try to take care of them if they're very good. We've also ran into people that are really, really good at it, but really, really slow. And
Mm,
you need to find the combination of someone that has a skill that can get things done.
sure. Yeah, it's not the government, so you got to be able to get it out of there.
I'm still
So,
trying to figure out how to get in on that gig.
well, you need to form an NGO, Tony.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I want to work from home.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you just have to haul that furnace home with you and put it in your garage. Then you got to get somebody to bring the shells to you. Well, and then I guess you need a
I
kiln.
expect you would miss a lot if you decided you want to work from home. You'd miss the people, you'd miss the work. So I
Yeah, there's
I kind of maybe off topic a little bit, but who decides? Because I've been curious about this since I saw your setup. Who decides where to cut the wax up into the pieces so that you can cast in a bunch of pieces for something and then put it back together? Who makes that decision on where that line is to cut them? Is it the people cleaning up the wax, or is it somebody else?
When the original comes in, I've been doing this long enough. I can decide where the piece needs to be cut up. And if I have any questions, I'll go to the people that'll be working on it and get their input. But there's very few sculptures that come through here that we haven't seen or done something very similar.
Hmm.
Also, yeah, some people go through a complex bidding process, figuring out times for each department. I usually do bids in 30 seconds or less because we have manufacturing software that tracks everything down to the minute, and it's tough for someone to bring in a piece that we haven't done previously. I know what those costs involve. The one factor we deal with that a lot of foundries don't deal with is artist participation. They want to come in and check their final piece before the patina is added. And some artists they want to be here a while to make sure everything's just right, and they see things no one else will ever see, and they're charged accordingly. Some of our best artists walk by at 6 feet and say, that looks pretty good, and they're gone. They get a little better pricing. Everything's, if we keep our labor costs below 37%, because our process is so labor intensive, then I know we're doing good.
What kind of
That's
time?
awesome.
I mean, this is an unfair question because the stuff you pour is so different in scope. But what kind of time frame are people looking at it from the time something comes in the door, or I should say, from the time you start working on it until it's ready to be shown or shipped out again? Are we talking weeks, months, hours, minutes? What do you guys do?
Well, Nate can verify this. It depends what your backlog is. Right now, if someone brings in a life-size piece for us to cast, we're not going to be able to even get started on it for 3 to 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then a life-size piece, if it was the only thing going through the shop, we could get it done in about 3 weeks. But right now, our lead times are running about 8 months, which is not ideal.
But that
Yeah.
just kind of
And
speaks to the volume too that you guys are turning out.
Well, the other thing is if you're an artist and you find a foundry that says we can get right on it, based on the amount of art foundries that have gone out of business, there's a reason they can get right on it. You might want to take that into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, that kind of talks to you for sure. So, yeah. So whenever you're working with sculptors and artists, I mean, is there do you guys collaborate with them on best practices, or you're just basically that whatever their sculpture is, then you just work with it, and obviously don't put any cut lines in the detail areas if it's an Indian with a a frontal, or there's a lot of feathers or flowers and that things, you're gonna cut and put lines around that sort of thing so that nobody's having to repair or weld through that. That would take even more skill, I would think.
Yeah, we try to do things that doesn't increase our labor. I mean, we talked earlier before we started recording about common sense. I mean, you don't want a parting line going right through somebody's face. You want it in areas that can be welded easily texture matched easily. And sometimes you can't get away from it. What I would tell you is we get a lot of jobs that no one, or very, I'm not going to say no one, but very few foundries can pull off. Whether it has to do with the engineering or the complexity of the piece. So we get a lot of projects that are not your typical projects. They require some structural engineering, and they're just going to be a little tricky to put together. And sometimes they're a little more trickier than you thought they were going to be, which screws with your schedule. It's not like you're running a green sand press line that you're just cranking out 1,000 of the same things. If we've got 10 of the same things, depending on what artisan is working on them, there's going to be different costs involved because one of your employees that worked on them is a little faster than the other one. But when you lined all 10 of them up, you and Perry could look at them and say they're identical. But if you went and really looked at them, it depends on which artisan had their hand on it because there's so much handwork, there's going to be subtle little differences.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So when you're doing multiples like that, I guess you're just pulling a master off of there with a plaster Paris or your urethane mold, and you're recasting those and getting the wax that way.
Yeah, if you have 10 pieces in the addition, you're going to need to pour 10 different waxes and start them all through the process.
Okay. Most of the time, are you just doing one-off shells, or you have multiple cavities a lot of times?
Well, what's unique about our business is artists normally set up an addition number, say there's 15 in the addition. And depending on if they're wanting to get these in galleries and they have 4 galleries, they might order 4 pieces. It might be one of a kind, but we keep the molds so they can order 2 this month and 2 more 6 months from now. We don't care if it's 1 or 20.
Okay.
But
Have you ever had?
You're storing all your molds, all the molds you guys have?
Yeah, and it's quite the problem. We say we will store them up to 2 years, but during those 2 years, they need to either take the molds back after 2 years or order another piece. And we don't own the molds. We make the molds, but the artist owns the copyright and owns the molds. So if we see a piece that we think's pretty cool, we can't just cast one for ourselves.
Right.
And we make sure when an artist brings in a piece, most of the time it's obvious it's their piece, but if someone brings in a piece that they're wanting to mold off of bronze, an existing bronze, we'll do our very best to make sure that they have permission for the copyrights.
Yeah, I would think that would be pretty difficult, and for some people, depending on where it come from, especially if it's imported, I guess.
We have to sign an NDA that we can't discuss it, but we make a very famous trophy that's given out in New York at the end of every college football season, but we can't say
wow.
what it is.
Sure. Yeah, mum's the word.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. That speaks volumes of your talent and expertise. That's for sure.
Well, I have no talent. I just have a lot of really good guys.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, it's having a team like that. I mean, I can't tell you that those aren't regular old foundry guys, but they're definitely craftsmen for sure and artisans. They should wear that with pride.
Yeah, most of my guys would die if they'd have to work in a real foundry because our entire facility, except the pouring floor, is heated and air conditioned.
Yeah.
If it gets down to like 67 in the winter, they're thinking they need to go home.
You're good to them, Tony. That's awesome.
67 at Nate's facility, they'd be dying probably. They'd be freezing to
It'd be
death
a little
down there in
cold.
Houston.
Yeah, here in the East Texas, it's humid and it's already in the 80s. So yeah, for sure. Are you guys doing much with any 3D printing or any new materials and that sort of thing, or is it pretty just much all traditional art?
We do a lot, quite a bit with 3D printing. We have not done the capital outlay, but we deal with a 3D printer up in Oregon called Form 3D that are pretty amazing. And the nice thing is an artist can sculpt a piece 2 foot high and one at 10 foot tall. They'll scan it, blow it up to that size, and actually print castable panels at our 3/16 of an inch. So the artist saves on the point up of them actually sculpting a, 6, 8, 10 foot piece. There's no mold cost involved, no wax cost involved, and their artwork is stored digitally. And so, say artist A is at an art show and he's got a 9 foot piece that we've done that with, and they said somebody comes by and says, "I'd really like that, but I only want it 5 foot tall." Not a problem. They can just reduce it, send us the panels, and we can cast them.
Okay. Are those panels, are they a plastic, or are they like a PMMA type powdered material?
They're in theory a wax infused plastic, and we have to charge a little more for them because when we put them in the kiln, normally our wax just melts. These things combust.
Okay.
So if we set our kiln at 1500 degrees and put these in there, at the height of the burnout, our kiln might be at 1700 degrees because they're a fuel. They're
Mhm.
combusting and vaporizing, and we spend a lot of money for afterburners on our stack, so we don't make the neighbors mad. So, yeah,
Sure. Okay.
You have to
Okay.
deal
So
with
wax infused.
do you have to deal with ash and things like that that are left inside, or is it burn out really, really clean?
well, a normal burnout is about 30 to 40 minutes. We burn these out probably 3 to 4 hours. What we try to do is stick them in the kiln um, after we're done pouring and everything. And then when we go home, we'll keep the kiln closed but shut it off so the temperature reduces gradually. And that seems to work pretty good for us.
It just gets rid of any of the material that was left behind from the burn. It just burns it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything you have to do after? Do you have to blow them out with compressed air the next
We
day before you?
You don't have to. There's a lot of people in our industry that go from de-wax to pour without the piece leaving the kiln.
Okay.
I don't like that, but we we use premium slurry products. We could get our slurry a lot cheaper if we didn't use what works for us. And unlike you, Nate, when we cast something, our raw material costs are about 6% of our sell price. You worry about when you pour something, the yield on it, how much. We could care less, you know,
Sure.
uh, 3/16 of an inch thick on, a 6 foot sculpture might weigh 180 pounds
Okay.
at
Yeah.
3/16 of an inch.
Yeah.
Um,
It's hard to put it in perspective given the size and the wall thickness. Yeah.
right, and I remember the discussions. Well, if we reduce this riser, we can pour two more pieces out of a ladle, and we're very concerned about the yield on everything. And the thing I love about this business is I remember at the sand foundry, we were pouring aluminum bronze impellers. And these things look beautiful, and we're all slapping each other on the back. And we sent 30 of them off, and they got machined, and a little frosty showed up on an unweldable area. We
Steel
sent
surface.
them
Yeah.
back and told us to remake them. We haven't ever had anything sent back here.
Yeah. Industrial castings are they're finicky. You get a little fly speck in a seal surface, you got a major problem. If it can't be repaired by a skilled welder, then you're gonna have to remake that rascal. So, yep.
Yeah.
I could see how that would be advantageous, not having anybody reject a part for a little bit of porosity that's just right under the surface, especially in some stainless steels and things of that nature. You get that subsurface defect and open it up with a machine surface, and next thing you know, you got a problem.
Yeah. I mean, our customer returns got better after I was at the sand foundry for a while, but if you took the amount of dollars those actually cost you twice as much money because you're having to replace them for free. And that time you spent replacing them, you could have been doing something that generated some revenue.
Exactly. Yep. And the freight coming back and everything else that goes along with that.
Yeah. And I'm a lot of artists own art foundries. I'm not an artist. I can't even draw decent stick figures.
So Nate had mentioned earlier, maybe before we started recording, talking about having utility players in the foundry, and in his world, I think it's a distinct possibility. What about with you? I mean, it sounds like with your different groups, especially with the artisan kind of people that are working for you, do you have people that can do different jobs within the foundry, or are they all pretty specialized?
We have probably 5 or 6 that we can float between departments, but there's some departments we're kind of stuck on, like the pouring floor. And that might be a weakness of mine because I don't care about how beautiful your piece of art is. I care about how good the metal is and how it moves through the process. My goal is to pour the best metal in the country. We want the cleanest, best looking metal in the country. And that's what we're always striving for. So in those areas, we don't have a lot of cross training in those areas or the actual casting.
So that is exactly the opposite of what I would have thought. I would have thought the people that are doing the wax work, that are cleaning up the things, that are doing the welding and brazing the parts to back together, all that those would have been highly specialized and you don't have a lot of crossover. But the guy that's pouring the metal, you could find other people, maybe the guy who's doing the shell, building the shell out could actually pour, or the ones that are baking them out could pour. That's interesting to me. Interesting. But you did tell a story about,
Tony spoils the guys in the shell room though, because it's all
What's-
air conditioning. You got to
what's that?
remember, it's hotter. It's hot. I said Tony spoils the guys that are in the other departments. The guy on the furnace, he's the one that's sweating his rear off.
But like Nate and I were talking, you can teach anybody to pour metal. It's just if something goes wrong with the furnace or the crucible or, a situation happens, you want them to be able to make decisions that A, aren't going to get anybody hurt, and B, it's going to save your equipment. And that's what I worry about. To
Yeah.
tell a little story, I was in my office one day. We were pouring stainless steel, and my metal pourer at the time comes running in and says, "I've started the foundry on fire. I've started the foundry on fire." Well, we're pouring stainless, and because we have a lot of artwork around here, he had grabbed a piece and that was for remelt that was made out of pewter. And if you've got 2600-degree metal, you sure don't want to throw a piece of pewter in there. So it was just billowing smoke, and he thought everything was on fire. And I told everybody just go outside, and we turned on all the fans, and I stood there until it all got burned off, and then we kept going.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. Yep. I've seen the occasion where you've got some zinc alloy or heavy zinc alloy in the furnace, and somebody walk away to go grab a bottle of water and come back, and it got away from them, and next thing you know, the clay graphite crucible is just billowing smoke out of there. You think the whole place is on fire. That zinc starts to burn out and it floats up in that white smoke, and man, you just think all heck's breaking loose, and it can make your heart really start to race. That's for sure. So if you haven't ever experienced it, it's something you don't want to see. But in the
So
grand scheme of things, that's how most people learn. So
I have a young, great kid that was helping me on the pouring floor yesterday. He's been here a couple years, great kid. But anyway, I was screwing around with the capacitors on our furnace and turned it up a little too high before we had a molten bath, and some of the metal in the pot arced and made a loud bang. And I always tell him, I go, if you see me running, just follow me.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you buy all your metal. You buy all certified ingot
We do.
for your bronze and your stainless.
Yeah, when we started here, we were alloying our own, and there's a little, there's some tricks. You better know what you're doing if you're alloying your own metal. And in the 37 years, there was probably 3 times I tried to just kill the market by making a great deal. And 3 times we lost our butts. So I figured if I was smart enough to trade commodities and figure out pricing on commodities, I probably wouldn't be sitting in a foundry.
That's funny. Yeah. So, yeah, so the bronze alloy, so that I would think it would make a big difference when you're alloying metal, especially in bronzes and stainless, to get the colors correct. But maybe it doesn't matter because you can hide some of that with the patina, depending on how you do it. If they're not exactly the same, close enough is good enough. I don't know.
No. Uh, in fact, we buy all of our weld rod from a company in Oregon. And early in my career, that's a huge, huge problem we had because weld rod manufacturers, we TIG everything. Weld rod manufacturers, it just has to fall into the specs. And for it to be in the specs, you know, you can have 94 to 96% copper and 3.8 to 4.2 silicone, and you can have X amount of lead in it, like the 0.101. And what we found is if the lead gets high, you can't weld it. And if you get a batch of weld rod that's at, say, 94% copper and one that's 96%, mechanically it's still perfect. But when we go to patina, you can see the difference in the alloys.
Oh, wow.
We spent so much time early in my career getting smelters to do an art grade alloy that basically you're going to pay more, but you're starting with virgin ingot, #1 copper. Because if you get #2 copper, you get lead and everything else. So, and we got them to tighten up the specs. So, instead of 94 copper, it can be 94.8 to 95.2. And so we spent a lot of time on that. And then we found a guy that has made a deal that they'll make the exact same alloy and weld rod. And we pay more for it, but we never get surprised with a different color line running across to bronze.
That's pretty smart that you could, and really beneficial that you can find somebody that would meet the spec for the weld rod.
Yeah, there for a while before we found this guy, we were making our own weld rod, pouring 1/8-inch spaghetti wax and rolling it out, so we knew that the alloy would match our castings exactly.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. That's wild. Okay.
Yeah, but I guess
Interesting.
it guarantees your metal's the same, right?
Yep.
And are you pouring the
Okay.
same alloy for everything, or do you have different alloys that you use for different kinds of sculptures?
In bronze, we only pour one alloy,
And bronze,
you
yeah.
know, and in stainless, we only pour one alloy. We pour a 316L. And the L's low carbon helps us. It's not quite as hard, and it has most of our stainless pieces go outside, so it has some better characteristics for not discoloring or getting surface oxides on it.
Okay. The 873 silicon bronze, the main art sculpture alloy.
There's a few companies up in the Pacific Northwest that pour a Herculoy alloy that's a little higher in zinc. But yeah, they make cool patinas, but otherwise it's a pain in the ass to weld and
Yeah.
structurally
Anything with zinc in it is not favorable for welding, that's for sure.
I want to ask one more question, and maybe it's two more questions. We'll see how it plays out here. The spirit of it is, I want to hear a good story about your Foundry experience, and I will ask about something you told me when we met. I think it was in 22. I think it was when it was not 23. It must have been 22 when we met, and we were talking, and we were standing there on the floor, and I'm watching these guys pour, and somehow the conversation came around to getting the metal to melt cleanly in my crucible and with my situation. And I was having a lot of trouble with a lot of oxides coming up on the top, especially with the copper alloys. It was just like I seemed like I was losing a lot of metal to just it drying out, if not for lack of a better term. And you told me something, Tony. You told me to throw a little bit of borax and a little piece of broken brown beer bottle into the mix. And do you remember what you said when I asked you why? Do you remember what you said to me?
Well, that's because that's what I was told to do. No science behind it. Mr. Horner, who was the older gentleman that kind of taught me the ropes about the foundry business, that's what he always said, you know, you got to use brown beer bottles. They're the only thing that will work. And I'm sure there's no science behind that either. So have you tried it though?
Well, yes and no. When I am doing a copper alloy, whether it be brass or bronze, I will do a little borax, but I've been using clear glass, pieces of broken clear glass. And I will tell you from my experience, my yield, just the melting yield, has gone way up in doing that, which is crazy. I would have never thought it. Now, but then you get this goo over the top of your crucible, right? That you gotta deal with. But regardless, I have a lot more metal in my crucible when I'm done. So, which leads to another question I have for you. What are you guys doing, or do you do anything at all along those lines about keeping the oxidation down when you're melting? Do you have something you pour into your ladle or your crucible or whatever it is you're doing to seal it off, or you just melt it quick enough with that induction that it doesn't really matter?
Yeah. And in our process, even if you gas the metal, you never see gas metal that has shrink. So, you know, if the piece is really smooth, it's an issue. But if it has a lot of texture, I've known a couple foundries that actually try to gas their metal because they have shrink problems. They're pouring it too hot. But we do nothing. On stainless, we'll use the pearl top to, you know, get rid of the oxides. But other than that, no.
When you say gassing the metal, is it like degassing the metal, running something down inside to bubble up through it? That you're talking about, or something different with gassing the metal?
Gassing the metal's just bringing air into it. It some, and this is getting a little out of my expertise, but some foundries have a nitrogen layer that they'll put in there to degas their metal. A lot of times, depending on the atmosphere, because an induction furnace is a mixing action, it'll pull gas or air or whatever into the metal and it actually stays there. So they have ways of degassing the metal before they pour, but a gas metal won't really shrink. It's not good, but if all you care about is the surface quality and it doesn't show up there, that's okay too. But
Yeah,
we,
and sometimes in permanent mold, a lot of times they'll want to gas the metal because of the shrink issues. If they're not needing to machine the part in particular. I know that there's been old wives' tales online about people on Reddit and things of that nature where they recommend plunging a piece of potato in your aluminum so that it doesn't shrink as much because it will actually gas the metal. But again, sometimes if you superheat your metal or you hold your metal, especially in bronzes, in my experience, you can gas the heat. And a lot of times in sand in general, you'll see a muffin top or a riser that's domed the
exactly.
wrong direction. It doesn't pipe. So you do run into that. And typically it's because uh, the poor melter is asleep at the wheel, or he had somebody watch the furnace while he had to go use the restroom real quick, and it took a little longer than he thought, or things of that nature. Because typically, in my experience, whenever you melt copper-based alloys or just alloys that you're wanting to melt and pour, you don't want to necessarily hold it. There are some alloys that you can do that, and iron and that sort of thing. But copper-based alloys, you want to melt it, get it to pour temperature, tap it out, and pour it immediately, as best you can, so that you
Yeah.
don't
And,
reintroduce that hydrogen humidity from the air that it stirs in there.
and like Nate said, you will be able to tell if you gassed your metal because when you pour it, your feeding system, you'll either have piping, so your feeding system's feeding it, or it'll look like a dome where that's going the wrong way. That's the air trying to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fortunately, I think probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but with your sculptures, I would think that the surface would be pretty good, but the gassing would be under the surface for the most part.
Yep. And that's kind of cheating, but
We
and
won't
not
tell all your
it's
secrets.
also not advisable, but I
Sure,
know a few people that try to do it, and I wouldn't recommend sticking a raw potato in metal because of the moisture in the potato.
I would never recommend that.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah, the
might go
bad
boom.
idea. Yeah, yeah, and like I say, it's one of those internet things. Of course, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? So
Exactly.
That's right.
Well,
Well, I can't.
I've been getting a lot of links to foundries in India.
Oh,
I'm gonna
gee.
try to talk to my guys pouring barefoot or with a pair of sandals on and no safety glasses.
yeah, no gloves.
Oh, they're kneeled down right beside the mold. They're pouring it towards them. They're pouring this crazy stuff that you see. Well, you don't have any trouble, I assume, where you are with air in your molds or with moisture because you don't have either of them there in Loveland, right? You have no air and you have no moisture.
We're probably one of the only shell foundries that I know that has a humidifier in our shell room because we have to be careful that it doesn't get so dry that the first coat
Yeah.
slurries dry too quick because that causes cracking and buckling. So we try to keep our humidity at a minimum of 40%, and that seems to work pretty good. The other thing we've ran into that we've alleviated early on in the spring and the summer, where you would have the air conditioning running during the day and the heater at night. For some reason, the shells didn't seem to like that. So we revamped our HVAC system and the air handling in the shell room, and we haven't had that problem lately.
Wow. Wow.
Is there too high of humidity when with the shelling,
Well,
with the
yeah,
drying?
a a lot of people in high humidity areas have dehumidifiers, and an air conditioner is a dehumidifier, but it doesn't bring it down enough. So they'll actually have commercial dehumidifiers to pull moisture, because you're getting moisture every time you dip and you pull it out. You know, we've actually, when our humidifier can't keep up, when it's too dry, we'll pour buckets of water on the floor to get the humidity up a little bit.
Okay, I've heard of that. That's very interesting. Yeah, and we have a humidifier here at our facility that'll mist air. From when the 3D printers were here, you had to keep the humidity at a certain the sand printers at a certain humidity level, or they didn't work real well. So, well, cool. Now, do you guys do any outside work with sand molds at all? If somebody wanted to have you guys pour a sand mold that was 3D printed, you guys would assemble and pour for them?
We do, but it's for a college in Kansas, Fort Hays, where I went to. Um, they have an awesome foundry. They have a huge cupola that they pour iron with right in the middle of campus. I know no one's figured out what the hell they're doing, because it scares me to death. But Toby Flores runs the foundry and art department. Good friend of mine, great guy. He's one of those guys that somebody says, let's try this. And instead of talking about it for a semester, it's done by the weekend. And he's brought some pretty wild sand molds out here, and we've poured those in stainless for him. Hopefully nobody from OSHA is watching, because he brought a piece out for stainless, and he had some foam in it, and my guy wasn't real comfortable, and it was in the summer, so I had my golf stuff on and shorts, so I just went ahead and poured it for him. Kind of made me feel like I was in India.
Oh, too funny. That is awesome.
And as the owner of the company, I'm not, probably like you, Nate, I'm exempt from work comp. So if I get
Yeah.
hurt here, I'm on my own. So
Sure. Yep. That's
All
definitely
right.
a
Well,
thing.
we have kind of at the end of our time here, so I'm going to wrap it up. But Tony, thank you so much for coming on. Been a pleasure to talk to you again, and just so glad I'm so glad you answered my email a couple of years ago, and I got to come up and meet you. Anything else you want to add, Nate, before we go? Or
No, Tony, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast with us. It's always good to hear other people's stories and how they got involved, and and again, keep it up with what you guys are doing. It's pretty cool to see that type of thing. Again, foundry industry is it's the best job I've ever had. It's really, really gratifying work to be able to make something from nothing. You guys are kind of doing the same thing, and taking that art and turned it into something real that other people for generations and generations can see. And you may not realize it, but you're leaving a legacy all across the nation, and perhaps the world. I don't know where all the pieces go, but that's pretty gratifying. It's something you should I tip my hat to you for sure.
Well, people have always asked me in the past how I got in this industry, and I just tell them I didn't study very hard in college.
I understand. That's too good.
but you must have
That's
mountains of common sense. So.
Hopefully. Some days better than others.
All
Well,
right,
I think
Tony.
I think you're in good company.
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it, and we'll be talking with you later.
Okay.
Yep.
Nice talking
All
to
right.
you guys.
Thank you, Tony.
See ya.